Great. Okay. Well, welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us in our Everyday People, Everyday Leader videos. This is part of a series to develop leadership skills based on Everyday People, Everyday Leaders book that we've produced. And this video with you today is looking at the topic of developing others. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, Colin.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Paul, I'm delighted to have you here with us today. We met many years ago when you were director of an organisation called Covenanters, but you do something very different now. So what is it that you do?
Yes, well, mostly what I do now is to mentor and coach people in leadership. Well, those in leadership or emerging leaders. That's my passion, really. I mean, it all began probably even before I was working for Covenanters, when I worked for SU and in teaching. To the mentoring heart, I think, was growing then, but that's mostly what I spend my time doing now.
Yeah, great. So actually what you've taken is this real passion for developing others that kind of started, as you say, many years ago, and it's something now you've brought into fruition, you do in your day-to-day lives. And I love that. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that I spotted in you when you led Covenanters, some real qualities I think that we can all do with. And I think what I've seen is developing others is something that we both believe in. Like you've talked about, developing the emerging leaders.
Yes.
I talk in the book about the importance of relationship, opening the door to that development of others. I mean, how important do you think relationship is in developing others?
I think it's absolutely crucial, actually. And I think a realization that I've come to in recent years is just that God is relationship, that Father, Son, and Spirit, that the Trinity are relationship. So I think God's heart for humankind is that we live in relationship, because that's a reflection of who He is. So really, without relationship, you can't do very much. Someone said to me years ago that any great work of God grows out of a sense of fellowship of His people. And that's so true. So whether it was in Covenanters or SU or other places I've worked, relationship has been absolutely crucial. And it's not an optional extra to build relationship around leadership. I think it's core to what we're about, really.
Yeah. In the book, I talk about a guy called Cyril Wern, who actually I kind of met through a Covenanters group. So as we've just kind of talked about there, Covenanters is a church-based organisation. And I remember, Cyril would just spend hours with us, and it would be probably more on the Friday nights where we would do club, and we would have kind of snooker and table tennis, and we're both venerable, aren't we? We've both lost our hair through growing venerable. And so many years ago, when the bottles of pop that was like 15p and the packet of crisps that were 5p, and he would spend time with us. And I mean, how do you do that? Is it that you spend time with someone and you then decide that yes, this is somebody that can be mentored, or does someone approach you and just say, could you mentor me? And then you have to spend time with them. How does it work for you?
I think there have been a variety of routes over the years into mentoring relationships. I mean, thinking back to my days with Covenanters and SU and YFC, it grew out of a conversation that maybe I had with someone. And I think if you've got a heart and mind and spirit that's open to this kind of thing, it'll be amazing how God will bring people across your path. So I'm thinking of one guy in particular who I know was a member of a local action group for Covenanters, and he was just a young guy in his early 20s. And as we chatted, I thought to myself, I'd like to throw wood on his fire, basically. There's so much going on in this guy's life, and then I was like probably, 15, 20 years older than him. And so I also benefited from his perspective on things, which I've always tried to remain open to as well. So it's a combination of factors, but just this sense that I think there's something here that could be mutually encouraging, because that's how I see it. I do see it as a mutual relationship, between whoever it is that you're mentoring and the mentor.
Yeah, I love that. And I just, that phrase you just said just absolutely resonates with me. I see in this someone where I could throw wood on the fire. And
Yes.
there's something you recognize there. There is a spark or a flame or a fire going already, but
Yeah.
you see something that you can bring to them. But then
Yeah.
you've also talked about mutuality, and that there's actually, you can learn too from them, from their perspective, from their
Yeah. Yes.
approach.
I
So is there
sometimes,
something in record? Sorry, Paul, go on.
no, I was just going to say, I sometimes think of Elijah and Elisha, in this respect, in that they were both obviously under the direction of God, and Elijah had spoken, and God had spoken to Elijah about where he was going to find Elisha. But Elisha was busy; he was working, he was, operating the plough. He wasn't just sitting there on the ground with his arms folded, waiting for somebody to come and strike up a conversation with him. He was active. And I think if you can see in someone's life that God is moving and working, and there is a fire there initially, then that's what I'm passionate about, is seeing that fueled.
Yeah. So you see something in there that actually can
Yes,
grow,
yes,
and something that you can bring to it. So it's a
right,
sense of, actually there's something I can help with as part of
yeah,
that.
mm,
So one of the things I talk in the book is about this purposeful mentoring. It's the kind of second component. And what I remember about you in Covenanters is that you always seem to have someone in tow with you. And so, that question about how do you select someone, obviously see something in them that you can bring. Is there anything else that you do when this whole purpose, being purposeful in developing someone? Is there
yeah.
anything else?
Yeah, I like to have chats around vision and what they feel God is revealing to them, where they see themselves in the future. I like to, again, make it very much a mutual thing. So I like to share my hopes and dreams as well and see if there's a connection there.
Mm.
But I think the big thing for me is, because I am quite driven, I have to put my hands up and say I do like to make things happen, but I also like to see people develop. So it's not just about getting a task done. It's about developing people and getting a task done, because sometimes it would be quicker to do it yourself. If there's a job that you want to get done, whether it's in the family or in church,
Yeah.
or you can see how it could be done, and you think, yeah, and I think I could do that. I could fit that in on Wednesday afternoon or whatever. But the mindset of the mentor, who is all about developing other people, is who can I involve in this task? So whenever I've recruited, for want of a better expression, guys in the past to work with me, it's been about, and how can their development be a key part of this as well? It's not just them helping me to do the work. It's about their personal growth and spiritual maturity as well.
Yeah.
That's what's been core to what I've tried to do.
Yeah, brilliant. I talk in the final chapter of the book around defining success. Actually, if we just view success as fulfilling a task or hitting a target or getting certain numbers, then we've missed something.
Yeah.
And actually, this true success actually comes when, exactly as you've described, you've developed people as part of the process.
Yes, I think so.
And that you're kind of, I want to describe, you're leaving people in a better position as you leave the room than when you kind of came into it.
Right,
That is a true kind of resonance of success.
But what it does mean, though, is that you do, what I've learned for myself personally in this whole process over, I don't know, probably nearly 30 years now, is that you do have to be aware of your own ego. And, you have to me, seeing someone else grow and thrive is actually key to me as a leader. It's not about the position I occupy on the stage. It's about who they're becoming and developing into. And again, that's really important.
Yeah. So actually, as leaders, we have to be aware that, we've got to watch that desire, that it doesn't become, we've got another notch that we've scored of someone we've developed. It always has to come back to, I'm trying, what has to kind of lighten me up and excite me is that I've helped develop them, not that I've put the notch on the marker point, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in the book, I talk about some Miranda moments. So I don't know, Paul, if you've ever watched the program Miranda, the TV program, when she turns, doesn't she? And she either makes a ooh face to the
Right,
and
yeah,
you know what that face means, or
yeah,
she explains to someone her feelings, her emotions, or what she's going through, or what her plan is. And so
yes,
I
yeah,
talk about those Miranda moments and I, I've done this on a number of occasions where, I might have just dealt with a really difficult situation. I've been working with somebody and I'll just turn to them and just say, how did you feel that go? What did you see? And
yeah.
then explain my thoughts as part of that. Do you use that or an equivalent to that in any of your work with kind of developing others? And if you do, what benefit do you see of that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I love the way you put that, actually, Miranda moment. I love it. And yeah, I'm a great reflector, actually. I like to reflect as I'm going along on what I've done and what others have done around me. And I came across a question only yesterday, actually, which I thought was really helpful. I'm reading quite a bit of Pete Scazzero's The Emotionally Healthy Leader at the moment. And one of the questions which he raises in talking about expectations is whether we have permission to say to each other, do you mind if I read your mind for a moment? What a great question that is. Do I have permission to read your mind? And that is such a beautiful way of opening up a discussion
Yeah,
around something that's just happened.
yeah,
So the Miranda moment for me would be maybe in a car journey on the way back from an event, where I would say because often these guys who I used to recruit would drive me, so which was a huge blessing, actually. And I'd say, so what did you make of that this evening then? Let's have a bit of feedback on how you think that went. And of course, there's the good and the bad, because there are meetings you come out, you think, oh, I didn't handle that very well, or I went on too long there. I was over talking in that particular thing. So there are great opportunities. And I think this models to the folk that we're mentoring our authenticity and our willingness to learn from them. And that communicates huge value.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that whole vulnerability loop as well, isn't it? Of
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
actually, I didn't get that quite right. Just gives them permission, both in that moment, to maybe say, yeah, well, maybe I didn't do this bit right. But
Yeah.
it just says to them, leadership is not about this bit of just thinking I'm the all am and I'm perfect and
Right.
that I've got it all. It's leadership is about that constant reflection. And as soon as we stop doing that,
Yes,
we
that's right.
lose sight of actually what leadership is, but we model the wrong things, don't we? So
I
that,
think so. Yeah, I think
yeah,
so.
that honesty, and you say that authenticity,
Yes.
self-reflection, there's so many things in that process you've talked about. uh,
Yes.
yeah, and I love that the phrase you use, that as you say from the book about, can I have permission to read your mind? I mean,
Yes.
that's a great part of coaching, isn't it? And
It is, yeah.
that kind of offering something that I might be seeing here for them to either say yes or no and to work that through.
Well, exactly, because they can always come back and say, "Oh no, you've got completely the wrong end of the stick." As I may have, as I ask them for feedback, they may say something, and I say, "Actually, that's not what I meant at all."
Yeah. And then that helps you on that reflection. Just as you were saying that, I remember a number of occasions when I was leading as a head teacher, where some people go, "Are you cross with me?" I went, "No, why?" And they went, "Because your face looks a bit cross." And I would go,
Yes.
"No, that's my thinking face. I'm really sorry. It works the same way. My thinking face
Yeah.
might look cross, but I'm really not cross with you." And again, that honesty, building that relationship and
Yeah. Yeah.
working with people.
Totally. I
Yeah,
think particularly with the millennial generations, who really, for them to have ownership of a project, an initiative, or whatever, they need to feel that they've been able to contribute to the vision building process
yeah,
as it's formed. And I often say to people that whilst there are still leaders who stand at the front and say, "Hey, this is where we're going, are you coming?" There are now far more leaders who go, "Well, I'm not exactly sure where we're going, but let's journey together and
yeah,
discover what God's
yeah,
got."
yeah. I once described that almost like I saw my role as a leader as almost sketching out the outline of
Yeah,
the picture,
yeah,
and can you now come and help me paint it?
yeah,
And that involvement of people, and it all starts, as you say, with that self-reflection, that honesty, in chatting that through.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So, are there any other key aspects that you see of kind of this purposeful mentoring of people?
Um, yeah, I think there's two things I'd want to encourage, one of which is the development of trust. Actually, I think that's absolutely key. And that we would model a trusting relationship to them, and appropriately, and that it would come back at us too, that it would be two-way, that they trust us and we trust them. And that's always risky, of course, isn't it? When you share something of your experience, or you share an opportunity and there's a risk they might not do it quite like you do it.
Yeah.
And to be open to that is really important. And going back to what I was saying earlier about the ego, it's about holding it lightly, and we're not about producing clones. You and I both know that. That's a road to disaster, really. It's not. It's about helping them become the best version of themselves that they can be.
Yeah.
Also on that route is adaptability and being willing. And I think particularly at this period we're in at the moment, as lockdown is eased slightly after COVID-19, that we do have it's a real moment for us, I think, in leadership and in mentoring and coaching and the kind of work that you're doing, to be able to see things differently and to really see, God, as what the landscape looks like for us in the next season. And I think a large part of that will about being adaptable. I've just read Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger, and he talks a lot about this, the need on teams and for at all levels, really, for adaptability, and to be willing to regularly stop and take stock and say, is this the best route that we're going on? What do we all sense or feel,
Yeah.
Inevitably involves bringing others in, mentoring them and coaching them and listening to what they've got to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I've been doing some work with some organizations around, what are some of the skills that are needed in, as you say, COVID-19, and as we come out of it. And one of those key ones is adaptability, that ability to just adjust things. I think we need to redefine as well with people what success looks like. So we have to adapt that. What we used to see as success has got to change slightly. And as we, success now is working with people so they feel comfortable re-engaging with, whatever organization we might be working with in a way that they feel safe. So that ability to work with people, as you say, in that trusting relationship is absolutely crucial. Yeah, great. The third area that we look at in the book is about planning opportunities to develop people. So there's that purposeful mentoring, and linking to that is really planning the opportunities for the kind of gap areas that they may have. So, you talked about that fire and adding wood to the fire to make them even stronger. And for me, some of that is saying, well, this is where they are. This is where I could see they could be within the light, as you've said, of developing them for who they are, not to be a clone. But how important are kind of planning some opportunities for them to develop the skills that you see in them would be helpful to them? Do you see that? Are planning those opportunities important?
Yes, I do. I think it's really important, as long as, and I think this applies to everything we've talked about so far, as long as it doesn't in any way sniff of us trying to control what they become and who they are, because that can be a danger. When you're an enthusiastic, experienced leader and you've been around the block a bit, you can see the potential, can't you? And you can see what a younger person could become and the direction they could head in. But it's got to be in line with their own personal sense of calling, and that requires a lot of communication. It's back to the relationships issue. Actually, it requires a lot of building connection, and always respecting the fact that they can say no. And but I think to be a broker of opportunities, or to be someone who looks for things that they could maybe get involved in that they might not even have thought of themselves. That's a key element, I think, of mentoring purposefully.
Yeah.
And because we're all about, presenting each other mature in Christ, aren't we? That is our mission as disciples, actually. So it should be part of how we function, but always with their full collaboration and agreement and understanding, and with, again, opportunity to review and reflect. But I think all the guys I've had work with me over the years, there have been projects, or there have been initiatives that I've encouraged them to develop on their own, and for us to use as opportunities to reflect and feed back to each other.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love that phrase you use, be a broker of opportunities.
Yeah,
I think that's a fantastic phrase. Yeah, a broker of opportunities. And as you say, bearing in mind who they are, what
yes.
would work for them, but they should say not cloning them, but just giving them that opportunity that will help them. I mean, what have you seen has been the impact of being a broker of opportunities then? What's been the impact on them?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of one guy in particular, and I use the term guy because I've always it's tended to be young men, guys that I've mentored. Although I'm 100% supportive and encouraging of women being mentored and coached as well. I'm totally egalitarian in all this. But I'm thinking of one guy in particular who is now an Elim pastor, and he's just such a huge encouragement to me. And he actually, interestingly enough, will have been one of the guys that you can remember, travelled around with me in the transition actually between Covenanters and Youth for Christ. He travelled around with me, Matt Town, and he's now the Elim pastor in Worcester. And it's a joy actually and a delight to see him flourishing and thriving in leadership. And we're having conversations now, sort of 20 years on, where he's really sharing his heart about the joys, the challenges, and I'm trying to support him. And we're close friends, actually. I wouldn't use the term mentor or coach to describe our relationship now. We've sort of moved on, but we're real peers in all this. And so it's hugely encouraging to see how he's been led over the years as he's pursued opportunities for development and growth, be that through studying at Elim College, becoming a ministry in training, and then a pastor of his own church, and he's there with his wife and his family, and it's a joy to me to see that, and there are many others too who have found their place either in what we might call church ministry, or indeed in ministry in their places of work, which are regular corporate environments,
Yeah.
And it's the thrill of my life, really, to see that.
So what you're talking about is you've seen it equip them effectively to roles that they then choose to take on, whether that's a church base or whether that's in day-to-day life. It's equipped them. Yeah.
Right.
Great. Yeah. So the last part is this kind of reviewing and planning with them. So actually it's like a partnership of helping them see how things are going and where they want to take it next. I mean, how important is that kind of review, or do you find it just sort of happens and merges? Do you do reviewing and planning with people?
Yeah, I do. I mean, again, it does vary according to the particular individual and the context that they're in. But I have a process that I use from a book called Mentoring to Develop Disciples and Leaders by Carson Pugh. And that's Pugh, P-U-E. And he has a matrix which he presents of basically 5 steps in the mentoring process. And I use that quite a lot, actually. And he speaks, well, his starting point is self-awareness. And he repeatedly comes back to that because he maintains that unless you know where you are, you can't navigate where you're going next. So it's a basic principle. So regularly during that 5-step process, I'll be saying, and where do we think we're at? How's it going? What's gone well? What's not gone so well? What can we do differently moving forward? Those 3 basic questions. And what I discover, to my amazement, and this is something, Colin, that you and I will live with all the time. So this is our bread and butter, this kind of language. But for many leaders, it's not. And they've never actually had the luxury of being able to have that discussion. It almost feels like almost too private or too sort of, personal. And yet it's where the growth is. And in fact, I've just received a little short video that Todd Bolsinger has made for me, actually, in advance of these retreats I'm going to be leading over the next couple of weeks. And he says in this video that he reckons in all his years and experience of leadership that where there isn't mentoring or coaching in place for leaders, it's malpractice.
Mm.
That's the term he uses, actually. It's malpractice. But for those of us who are used to it, and who, as I know you are, and as I am, when you're doing it all the time, you kind of think it's on everybody's agenda.
Yeah.
Actually, sadly, it's not. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping and praying that your book really adds to this fire, really, in leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is that ability, isn't it, to self-reflect. And,
Yeah.
and you say we almost judge everyone by our own standards and their own way of working.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, and I think, and perhaps until you've been coached and seen the benefit of it, or been mentored and seen the benefit of it, and that good quality coaching that empowers you about that decision making, and it's always about the person being coached, isn't it? That they take ownership, and we are. I kind of once heard it described as, we're almost like the Yoda in the sense that we're not the hero of the story, we're the guide. They are the hero of the story.
Absolutely.
And we are just there to help them as they reach that next stage. And well, okay, which angle do I take here?
Yes.
Or if, what is it in my life that I need to really hone here to make me stronger in leadership? Our role is as a guide, isn't it? It's not.
No.
It's not to be the hero.
No, I often say to people, if you want to be famous, don't be a mentor.
Because someone else will get it, and that's what fires us as coaches or mentors.
Totally.
Great, and and that ability to help someone realise which is the weakest point of my leadership, because that's the thing that will buckle under duress, and let me work on that now before I end up being the person that appears in the paper because it's gone snap.
Yes,
absolutely crucial. So when you're doing the reviews, how do you make it so it doesn't feel too formal? Because you could sit down and say, hang on, we've been doing this for 4 weeks, so we now do a sort of an appraisal on where you're going next. That almost feels too clinical. So, and bearing in mind what we were saying about the importance of relationship, how do you keep it informal and driven very much by them?
Yeah, well, there's normally food involved. Food involved, and maybe even a glass of wine in an evening, if that's the timing of the day. I feel quite seriously that food is a great leveler, actually, and so guys will come and see me. I mean, I'm in my garden office this morning. I call it my den, and we would have lunch in here, and I've got a little coffee machine, and I try and make it as conducive and hospitable as possible. Again, I often think of Jesus, at the side of the lake, John 21, when he invited the disciples to breakfast, and he invited Peter to have that special little one-to-one with him at the end, which was really a review type meeting. Do you love me, in effect? And but the Lord had created that environment, created that atmosphere in such a way that there was then that engagement and restoration could take place. And the intimacy that was there must have been phenomenal. And I suppose I aspire to create safety within a mentoring relationship, but also a place of honesty. And I would even say that to guys, something along the lines of, you'd want me to be honest with you, wouldn't you? Because who can actually argue with that? You'd want me to be honest with you. And as I would want you to be honest with me, actually, in terms of how you think it's going. And of course, when as part of the reflection, the feedback is slightly critical or kind of, constructively questioning, we have to be big enough to take that and see it as part of the growth process. And I've had a few times when, in recent months where I thought, whoa, I need to really reflect on that and adapt my approach, because that's a bit too heavy, or it's maybe not challenging enough, or because they will often say to me, how do you do it, Paul? If it's around, say, for example, their spiritual journeys or daily rhythms of prayer or whatever, what's your practice? And of course, I need to be able to talk about what my practice is, and if my practice has not been very good, I need to be able to say, well, I'm not so hot on that myself at the minute, but that's a sorry state of affairs. So that's personally quite challenging. So there's an integrity there in that, I think. And so this is all part of the review process. And I think you do pick up as well as you're sharing and talking. I think the Holy Spirit helps you to discern if there are things that you need to just pause on and investigate a bit more as the reflection's taking place.
Yeah, and that you talked about a number of things there, that equality of a meal together, and keeping that light. You've talked about a real honesty as well. So you're talking about there in terms of a mentoring relationship where
Yes,
very much is more of those Miranda moments and explaining how you're doing stuff, and that honesty in it as well, that and therefore that authenticity being really important. But in some ways, of course, that, as you say, that kind of description of, actually this helps me to make sure I'm working hard on my behaviors and my practices and my daily routines, whatever they may be.
That's right.
Yeah, and the importance of that is really key again for any kind of relationship. So in some ways you're talking as a mentor, but equally as a coach, that ability to also look at ourselves. Am I in a good position to be mentoring? And we need that honesty, but equally we need that.
Absolutely.
Our own self-reflection is really important too.
In fact, last week, I've just remembered this. I had an incident with a guy last week who I've mentored for probably about 15 years now, and he's a church leader, and we hadn't spoken for a little while, and then very early on in the conversation, he said to me last week, "Paul, I need to be honest with you about something." And all right, okay. And he sort of shared that we'd differed on something theologically in our previous conversation. And he said, I feel I need to apologize because since that, I feel like I've withdrawn a bit from our relationship because we saw things differently, you know. And that was a catalyst. That was a real catalyst for the conversation that then ensued, which was all about the fact that it's not about seeing things in exactly the same way. It's not about agreeing on everything, but it's about having the kind of security in your relationship where you can differ, you know.
Yeah.
But he'd felt he'd withdrawn from me because of that difference, and so I really respected him for being honest, actually, because he said, I don't really feel like I can go into this conversation today until I've sort of had an air clearer with you, and that's so welcome.
So interesting. At the root of that sits relationship, even though the relationship was sort of pulling slightly. That relationship meant honesty came. That honesty then actually allowed a whole new opening potentially around things like, how you manage them, where people are different to you, where they come from a different echo chamber or whatever, and how you manage that. And that importance then of for the two of you, but potentially for that person as well, that ability to see, that differences can be okay, and that we work on the points of connection rather than the points of disconnection.
That's right,
being crucial. Great. Paul, our time is drawing to an end, and it's been fantastic to talk to you. It always is. We've done a podcast recently, haven't we? And now this video as well. It's been brilliant. And that kind of analogy of iron sharpening iron, I think, is absolutely crucial. I always find I learn from our conversations, and hopefully those watching this video will do the same. But one last question for you, and it's finally, what are your top tips for developing others? What would they be?
I think, and again, this is very recent for me in terms of my thinking, is I think we need to acknowledge the shadow in people's lives. That where there's light, there's always shadow. And sometimes in developing leaders, in mentoring and coaching leaders, we, if we're not careful, we just focus on everything that's good and going well and exciting, and there will always be a shadow. There's always a flip side. There is in my life, your life, anyone that we might talk to. And so I think if we're going to develop leaders for the long haul, to help them to keep going so that their names don't appear in the paper because of something stupid they've done, we've got to acknowledge the shadow and somehow help them to embrace that and work with it and decide what they need to bring into their life to manage it. Now, we all know God can remove some things, but for most people, and in dramatic ways, but for most people, it's about working with my light and my shadow. Because, there's stuff of my shadow that I have to work through with my mentor and my spiritual director, and it's part of who I am, and it's been there a long time, and actually it helps to shape me because I'm aware of my weakness and my vulnerability. So I think that's crucial. And in a similar vein, I think as we develop leaders, it's about this on stage and backstage life, you know, that for leaders who are on stage, their backstage life is equally as important. In fact, almost more important, because if there isn't a good backstage life, you know, secure platform, then the front stage life becomes a farce, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I talk about this in the chapter on communication and the whole thing around dissonance, that if actually what we're saying is different to actually how we're leading and how we're behaving, it causes dissonance, and people are going, but you're saying one thing, but your behaviors are different. And that mentoring and developing others is crucial, as you say. I love that idea of shadow. And as you were talking about it, I'm thinking, of course, the more we shine our own light on shadow, the shadow we can work and make shadow reduce. I mean, it probably will always be there, and we've got to constantly be aware, because it will be a weakness perhaps of ours, but that ability to shine a light on it as a mentor, where you talked earlier about that, where you've got deep trust, so that people know you're doing this like a good leader to lift them up to better things, rather than to highlight their shadow to bring them down. I love that idea. I think that's really crucial. Great. Paul, thank you ever so much. As always, it's been an absolute pleasure. There's loads that we've learned here. There's some fantastic phrases, like you've said, you know, putting wood on the fire, just to kind of develop people and seeing them for who they can be is fantastic. I wish you continued success in your role with your mentees. It's a privilege they've got to be working with you. And thank you ever so much for joining us again today.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.